Minister, how will the government return to a balanced budget by 2028-29 without cutting the essential services, given the fact that current 13.8 billion deficit and rising debt interest costs?
Yeah, Nitin, it's always good to see you, and thank you for that question. First off, I would say that our interest costs are somewhat driven by primarily rising interest rates, which we have no influence over. The global markets, interest rates have gotten higher, so that's a big reason for it. Secondly, I would say that what the credit rating agencies look at is interest expense over revenues, and we have some of the lowest interest expense to revenues in the country, and we're well within our target that we set in the budget at 7.5 cents on the dollar. So I believe we got as low as 5.5, and we continue to be below 7.5 cents. And I would say, thirdly, the majority of our borrowing, as I just said, is not for deficits, it's for infrastructure. That, investing in a hospital, for example, that hospital is going to be around for 50 or 75 years. That subway is going to be around for 100 years. And yet we borrow all of it up front to build the thing. So that is good productive assets. That's the good use of debt. And we're doing it in a very measured and responsible way. Our path to balance is delayed by 1 year. So in the environment that we're in, with the tariff environment, the economic environment, and now the global conflict and affecting the price of gas and other commodities, this is the world we're in. So we're dealing with the reality. I would point out that Ontario has one of the fastest paths to balance in Canada. Canada, in their 5-year plan, never balances. Quebec balances in 4 years. All the other provinces, with the exception of Manitoba and Saskatchewan, don't have a balanced plan. So we have one of the fastest path to balances in all of Canada. How are we going to get there? In a couple of ways. First off, there's different ways you can get there. You can raise taxes. I'm not going to raise taxes. In fact, we've signaled that we're cutting taxes. We're cutting small business tax. We're cutting the HST for 1 year that's 13% on a new house, new build, new condo, new townhouse. If you buy a property for $1 million, that's $130,000 rebate that you'll get over the next year if you buy in the next year. So we're cutting taxes, not raising taxes. Now you can cut spending too. Now, we think there's a lot of waste, so we're always going to attack waste and find efficiencies and be smart about the money that we're investing. But I'm not going to cut spending and investments in healthcare or education and social services. I think that's short-sighted to cut that spending. So that's not part of our strategy. And thirdly, you've got to grow your economy is one way to balance your budget. Now, I've said that our economy is softer, not because of anything we've done in Ontario, but because of global forces and the tariff impacts south of the border. But let me say this, we're going up the ranks in terms of productivity. We're getting more out of our workers. We're getting more per hour of work, and based on the capital invested, we've moved up the ranks, and we continue to, and that's because we continue to set the conditions for economic growth. Lower taxes, lower regulation, faster permitting, investing in workers, retraining workers, reskilling workers, supporting workers, focused on our education system. So there's a good talent base of skilled trades, of social workers, healthcare workers, engineers, scientists. We have an advantage in Ontario with a world-class education system. People from around the world, as you know, want to come study here. And by the way, the federal government controls how many people from around the world can study here. So that's up to them, and we're impacted that way. But all these things add up to one thing, a stronger economy. And so our view is grow the economy, create the conditions for good jobs, good paying jobs, sustainable jobs, whether it's energy, critical minerals. Our infrastructure build of $210 billion, that's putting a lot of people to work to build the highways, the transit, the subways, the light rapid transit, the LRTs, the GO system, new schools, new long-term care facilities, new hospitals, renovated hospitals. These are putting a lot of people to work. And by the way, our HST cut rebate is going to create 21,000 new jobs. There's many ways to boost your economy. And of course, a stronger economy And a greater revenues means more tax revenues for me without having to raise tax. And that's how you balance the books. I think that's the prudent thing to do. I'll just end on this. I don't believe in passing debts and deficits to future generations. That's why our government is very focused on our goal of balancing our budget so that we can do our part and not put all the burden on future generations.
Minister, there was a strategy, buy local, and the Canadian strategy the government had. But is it really effective that buying local? Because what is the alternative to all the government software contracts, which are mostly US based companies? So, any action plan in the future to replace those softwares? And what is the strategy on those?
And that's a very good question. And of course, I would defer more technical or more some of the answers of that to our Minister of Procurement, Stephen Crawford. But I will say this in principle, every country around the world now is making sure that the appropriate provisions are put in place for making sure that buy local, buy Ontario, buy Canada provisions are appropriately embedded in regulations so that we give Canadian companies, Ontario companies, a fair shot at being able to compete for their services and their products. I will say that the previous administration actually put Buy America provisions in their legislation. So it's the world that we live in right now. We got to make sure that it's a level playing field for Canadian companies, and making sure that we've gone through and give our great technology companies. You talked about technology. By the way, there are some great technology companies that are Canadian based. They're very innovative and they have great products. So make sure that they've got a shot at procurement in this province, and particularly through this is through for our agencies where the government is 100% and owns the agency or the board or the commission. So that those rules are properly understood and properly and appropriately pursued. The budget focuses very much on not raising taxes, in fact, lowering taxes, like small business taxes, which will help 375,000 businesses. The HST rebate, the full 13% on new purchases of new builds, new homes for the next year, which will help affordability, which will help stimulate the industry to create more construction jobs and a boost to our GDP of some $2.7 billion. So these are some of the things that in this environment, reducing taxes, we've made a conscious decision to continue to invest actively and historically in our healthcare system and our education system, in our social services. So that's a hallmark of this budget as well. And we continue to lean in on those things that don't require anything but our own creativity and drive to boost our economy. Things like interprovincial free trade, cutting red tape and regulations, one project, one process for faster permitting in the province to get more of our critical minerals out of the ground, some of the minerals that we have that the rest of the world wants here in Ontario, boosting our energy platform by investing in our nuclear industry, our hydro, our renewables, and of course, gas as an insurance policy. And of course, investing in technology, our artificial intelligence advantage, our advantage in life sciences, advanced manufacturing. And then finally, continuing to make significant investments in our education system, including $6.4 billion for our post-secondary education system to make sure that our colleges and universities are sustainable and available to continue offering world-class education to our students here in Ontario. And finally, our retraining and reskilling, we invested billions on making sure that every worker in Ontario has the opportunity to have the right skills, to have the right training necessary for all the great jobs that we have in Ontario. So that's what this budget is about. All done with a fiscal eye on responsibility and a path to balance. I'll point out that we have one of the lowest deficits relative to GDP in the country, that our metrics are all very positive, our debt metrics. And in the last 2 years, we've received 2 credit rating upgrades. Very few jurisdictions have received any form of credit upgrades. In fact, many of our Other provinces have received credit downgrades. And I'd also point out that most of the debt that we are incurring is to build record-breaking infrastructure in this province, 210 billion over the next 10 years, building highways, building transit, public transit, building hospitals, building long-term care, building schools, building broadband, and beyond. So that's what this budget's about.